My husband took his entire family out to a Michelin star restaurant to celebrate his massive promotion to CEO. Everyone was invited except for me, his wife of 7 years. Before walking out the door adjusting his custom-tailored suit, he looked at me with this sickening blend of pity and disgust and said, "Do not forget to finish the leftovers in the fridge." I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply looked back at him, smiled, and said, "Okay." Then the moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I quietly began packing my bags. What Marcus did not know was that I was not just packing up my clothes. I was preparing to dismantle his entire life. Before I tell you exactly how I turned his ultimate triumph into his absolute ruin, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And please hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to quietly destroy a toxic person who completely underestimated your worth. I am Naomi Sterling, 32 years old, and I am sitting here in the dark of what used to be our shared living room. The streetlights outside our Buckhead mansion are casting long, cold shadows across the imported hardwood floors. The house is completely silent right now, a heavy, suffocating silence that feels like the calm before a devastating hurricane. I am just sitting on this expensive velvet sofa letting the darkness wrap around me while I recount exactly what led to this moment. To the outside world specifically, the wealthy African-American elite circles here in Atlanta, Marcus and I were a power couple on the rise. We had this sprawling estate, luxury cars in the driveway, and invitations to all the right country club galas. But behind these perfectly painted walls, my reality was entirely different. My husband Marcus and his mother Vivian had always viewed my background as ordinary and unworthy of their prestigious family name. I presented myself as a freelance accountant working from home, wearing simple clothes and keeping a low profile to avoid their constant scrutiny. They mistook my quiet nature for weakness and my modesty for a complete lack of ambition. They had absolutely no idea that I was the hidden founder of Apex Vanguard, the massive private equity firm that practically owned the financial heartbeat of this city. Just a few hours ago, the air in this very room was thick with Marcus's suffocating arrogance. He came walking down the grand staircase, smelling of expensive cologne and straightening the cuffs of a suit that cost more than some people make in a month. He had just received the news that he was being promoted to chief executive officer of a major health technology company after they were acquired by a massive corporate conglomerate. I knew all about the acquisition, of course, because my firm was the one that orchestrated the buyout behind the scenes. But to Marcus, I was just the plain, boring wife who balanced spreadsheets for local bakeries. I stood by the kitchen island wearing a comfortable, oversized sweater, genuinely waiting to see if he would finally include me in his success. Instead, he walked right past me to check his reflection in the hallway mirror. He turned to me, his eyes sweeping over my casual outfit with barely concealed contempt. He picked up his keys, flashed that signature arrogant smile he reserved for people he deemed beneath his social status, and delivered the line that officially ended our marriage. "The rest of the family is meeting me at the Capitol Grill downtown to celebrate," he said, smoothing his lapels with immense self-satisfaction. "Vivian made the reservations for us. You should just stay here. Do not forget to finish the leftovers in the fridge. I think the chicken from Tuesday is probably going bad by now." He stood there waiting for a reaction. He wanted me to argue. He wanted me to beg for an invitation to cry tears of frustration, to ask why his own wife was not welcome at the biggest celebration of his entire career. He thrived on making me feel small, so he could feel colossal. But I had spent years analyzing bad investments and cutting my losses, and in that precise moment, standing in the fading evening light, I realized Marcus Sterling was the worst investment I had ever made. The hurt I should have felt was completely overshadowed by a cold, calculating clarity. I looked at his smug face, felt absolutely nothing but a hollow detachment, and smiled. "Okay," I said softly. "Just okay." He frowned, clearly disappointed that he did not get the dramatic ego boost he was fishing for, but he just shrugged his shoulders, turned on his heel, and walked out the door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate forever. The echo of the heavy oak door clicking shut was immediately shattered by the relentless, obnoxious vibration of my phone resting on the marble console table. Buzz after buzz after buzz, vibrating against the stone, demanding my attention. It was the family group chat arrogantly named the Sterling Empire. I picked up the device, the screen lighting up the darkened foyer with a barrage of notifications. They were not checking to see if I was okay with being left behind. They were not expressing any lingering guilt. They were openly celebrating my absence. I unlocked the screen and watched the toxicity unfold in real time, reading the digital trail of my own public execution. The first message was from Vivian, my mother-in-law. Her text read exactly as she spoke in real life, dripping with Southern passive aggression and deeply ingrained elitist snobbery. She wrote to the group that it was honestly a blessing I had decided to stay home. She typed out that the private dining room at the Capitol Grill required a certain level of sophistication and high society grace, something she claimed I simply did not possess. She actually wrote that it would be a tragedy to ruin Marcus's victory dinner with my clearance rack cardigans and my embarrassing lack of social connections in the elite Atlanta corporate scene. She went on to remind everyone that I was just a freelance bookkeeper from a working-class neighborhood on the South Side, and that bringing me around high-level executives would only drag down the Sterling family brand. I stared at the glowing words, my pulse remaining incredibly steady. Before I could even process her blatant classism, a new message popped up. This one was from Trent. Trent is my younger sister Chloe's husband. He is a loud, incredibly arrogant white finance bro who firmly believes he is the smartest person in any room he walks into. He recently launched some bloated tech startup and has been desperately trying to secure venture capital funding for months. He constantly talks down to me at family dinners, explaining basic economic concepts as if I were a slow child. His text message appeared on the screen, a masterpiece of unearned superiority. He wrote, "Honestly, Vivian, you saved me an hour of explaining basic market trends to her tonight. I am bringing two major venture capitalists to the dinner to celebrate Marcus, and having a freelance tax prep girl asking amateur questions about liquidity and cash flow would have absolutely killed the investor vibe. We need to project wealth and power tonight, not middle-class struggle." As if that was not enough, my own sister Chloe chimed in right beneath his message. My own flesh and blood, eager to secure her place at the table, typed out that I should just use the quiet evening at home to practice my cooking skills, attaching a crying, laughing emoji. She told Vivian not to worry, promising that she and Trent would make sure Marcus felt adequately celebrated without my depressing energy ruining the mood. As I read their words, a strange, visceral, physical sensation washed over me. It felt exactly like a camera executing a dolly zoom in a psychological thriller. The physical space of my sprawling foyer seemed to stretch and warp backward, the high ceilings and curved staircase extending endlessly into the shadows, while the brightly lit screen of my phone magnified in my vision until it was the only thing I could see. The sheer breathtaking audacity of these people, the absolute hilarious irony of Trent's message specifically. Trent was currently bending over backward, begging for a $5 million seed round from Apex Vanguard. He had been pitching my junior analysts for 12 weeks, sweating through his custom suits, desperately trying to impress the invisible board of directors. He had absolutely no clue that the freelance tax prep girl he was mocking in a family group chat was the sole decision-maker who would either greenlight his entire future or crush his startup into absolute dust by Monday morning. For 7 years, I had swallowed these insults to keep the peace. I had absorbed Vivian's sneering comments about my quiet demeanor. I had tolerated Trent's mansplaining. I had watched my own sister abandon our shared history just to stay in Vivian's good graces and enjoy the country club lifestyle. I had played the role of the submissive, unremarkable wife, perfectly hiding my wealth, my power, and my ruthless business acumen behind oversized sweaters and polite smiles. I did it because I wanted a marriage based on genuine love, not corporate leverage or financial dependence. But reading those messages, feeling the walls of the house warp and snap back into place around me, I realized the peace I was keeping was entirely one-sided. They were not my family. They were a collection of parasites feeding off a host they openly despised. They demanded my domestic labor. They demanded my silent compliance. And they demanded I shrink myself so their massive, fragile egos could fill the room. I did not shed a single tear. There was no lump in my throat, no trembling in my hands, no sudden urge to scream into the void or smash the phone against the wall. The sadness had been completely burned away by a cold, searing clarity. I looked at the group chat where Vivian was now sending heart emojis to Trent, praising his business acumen and calling him the son she always wanted. I could have typed a massive paragraph defending myself. I could have revealed my true identity right then and there. I could have told Trent that his funding was officially denied and told Vivian that her country club dues were secretly paid from my accounts. But true power does not need to announce itself in an emotional text message. True power strikes when the target is completely unaware, busy celebrating a victory they have not actually won. I tapped the screen. I did not type a single letter of protest. I simply selected the thumbs up emoji and hit send. A simple yellow thumbs up dropping right into the middle of their toxic celebration. A silent, terrifying acknowledgement that I had seen everything absorbed, everything, and agreed with their assessment that I was staying exactly where I belonged. It was the perfect response. It gave them nothing to argue with, no drama to feed on, and absolutely no warning of the financial storm that was currently gathering inside their house. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the kitchen island. The sharp clack of the device hitting the granite countertop echoed through the empty kitchen, sealing my decision. The time for playing the dutiful, mediocre wife was officially over. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs, and turned my attention toward the sweeping staircase leading to the master bedroom. I had bags to pack, documents to sign, and a very tight schedule to keep before they finished their dessert. I climbed the grand curved staircase of the Buckhead mansion, my bare feet making absolutely no sound against the thick imported carpet. If there were a camera tracking my movements right, then it would be a smooth, continuous shot, gliding effortlessly beside me, capturing a woman operating with absolute surgical precision. There was no frantic running. There were no dramatic pauses to wipe away stray tears or gaze longingly at framed wedding photos along the hallway wall. Every step I took was deliberate, grounded, and fueled by a quiet, burning power that had been dormant for far too long. I walked into the master bedroom, a massive suite dominated by a king-sized bed and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured grounds. I did not stop to reminisce about the nights I had spent lying awake in that bed listening to Marcus breathe while wondering if this suffocating existence was all my life would ever amount to. I walked straight past the bed and pushed open the heavy double doors to my side of the sprawling walk-in closet. Here the visual divide of our marriage was painfully obvious. On the right side hung the garments Marcus and his mother Vivian had purchased for me over the years. There were restrictive Gucci dresses, flashy Chanel blouses, and stiff Prada jackets, all carefully selected by them to ensure I looked the part of a grateful, compliant trophy when they forced me to attend their superficial country club events. Those clothes were heavy, uncomfortable costumes, completely devoid of my actual personality. They were fabric cages designed to remind me of my place in their world. On the left side of the closet were my own clothes. They were high-quality but unbranded cashmere sweaters, perfectly tailored linen trousers, and simple cotton shirts. They were the clothes of a woman who valued comfort and quiet authority over screaming designer logos. I reached up and pulled a sleek, unmarked black leather duffel bag from the top shelf. I unzipped it and began to pack. The imaginary Steadicam tracked my hands as they moved rapidly from the hangers to the bag. I took only what belonged to me. I packed my comfortable sweaters, my simple slacks, and my essential toiletries. I left every single designer label hanging exactly where Marcus wanted it. I left the red-bottom shoes lined up perfectly on the racks. I left the expensive handbags sitting in their dust covers. I did not want a single thread of his conditional, insulting generosity touching my skin ever again. Stripping myself of his money felt like breathing pure oxygen for the first time in 7 years. With my duffel bag packed and zipped tight, I walked over to the custom mahogany vanity tucked into the corner of the closet. I reached behind a false wooden panel that Marcus never even knew existed. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of a biometric safe hidden seamlessly in the woodwork. I pressed my thumb firmly to the glowing scanner. The heavy steel door clicked open with a satisfying metallic thud. Inside this dark metal box lay the true foundation of my life. It did not hold our marriage certificate or joint bank account statements. It held the architecture of my financial empire. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, matte black folder. Emblazoned on the front cover in sharp silver lettering was the logo for Apex Vanguard. Holding that folder in my hands felt like holding a loaded weapon with the safety switched off. I carried the heavy folder to the oak desk near the bedroom window. The camera of my reality closed in tightly on my hands as I flipped the cover open. Inside rested a stack of pristine legal documents I had quietly prepared months ago, keeping them locked away waiting for the exact right moment to deploy them. The top document was an official revocation of residency and an immediate notice to vacate. Marcus loved bragging to his arrogant golf buddies about this $800,000 house. He loved boasting about how he had secured the mortgage and put his name on the mailbox, treating me like a lucky guest who should be grateful for the roof over her head. What Marcus willfully ignored because he always believed the tedious paperwork was beneath his brilliance was the actual structure of our home ownership. He had let his freelance tax prep wife handle all the boring real estate documents during the closing process. He had blindly signed wherever I placed a sticky note, too busy admiring himself in the mirror to read the fine print. Because he never looked closely, he never realized that the deed to this property was actually held by a real estate holding company called Sterling Horizon. And Sterling Horizon was a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Vanguard, my company. I owned the walls, the roof, the hardwood floors, and the driveway. He was merely a tenant living entirely on my grace. And tonight that grace was officially and legally revoked. I uncapped my heavy fountain pen. The solid weight of the cold metal felt perfect between my fingers. I did not hesitate. I did not waver for even a fraction of a second. The imaginary lens zoomed in incredibly tight, filling the frame with the sharp, fluid motion of my hand as the dark ink flowed onto the crisp white paper. I signed my name at the very bottom of the eviction notice with bold, aggressive strokes. Naomi Sterling. It was a signature that routinely authorized multi-million-dollar corporate mergers, now executing the single most satisfying transaction of my entire career. I flipped to the next page and signed a comprehensive divorce petition. It cited irreconcilable differences and completely protected all of my premarital assets through the airtight prenuptial agreement his mother Vivian had actually forced us to sign. Vivian had demanded the prenup, thinking it would protect her precious son's future earnings from a poor girl from the South Side. She had unknowingly built an impenetrable legal fortress around my massive hidden wealth. The irony was so exquisite it made me smile. I gathered the signed legal documents, picked up my black leather duffel bag, and walked back down the grand staircase. The house felt entirely different to me now. It was no longer a suffocating prison filled with his mother's judging eyes and his condescending remarks. It was just a commercial asset I was about to liquidate. I walked straight into the sprawling custom chef kitchen. The white marble countertops gleamed flawlessly under the warm glow of the pendant lights. I walked over to the massive stainless steel refrigerator, pulled the heavy handle, and opened the door. Sitting right there on the middle shelf, exactly where Marcus had pointed out, was a ceramic plate tightly covered in clear plastic wrap. It was the leftover chicken from Tuesday night. The pathetic scraps he genuinely thought I deserved to eat while he drank expensive champagne with investors downtown. I pulled the cold, unappetizing plate from the refrigerator and carried it over to the center of the kitchen island. I peeled the plastic wrap back carefully, exposing the dry, sad pieces of meat. Then I took the pristine, legally binding Apex Vanguard eviction notice and the divorce petition, and I placed them squarely on the marble island, right next to the plate of leftovers. I arranged them so they would be the absolute first thing he saw when he walked into the kitchen. But the tableau was not quite complete yet. I looked down at my left hand. The heavy 3-carat diamond ring Marcus had given me sparkled sharply under the kitchen lights. He had always been so incredibly proud of that ring, constantly reminding me how many months of his salary it cost, using it as a shiny symbol of his ownership over me. I pinched the metal band and slid the cold, heavy diamond off my finger. It slipped away effortlessly, leaving absolutely no mark behind on my skin. I reached out and placed the diamond ring directly on top of the cold leftover chicken. Right next to the ring, burying its teeth into the dry meat, I pushed my heavy brass house key. The visual message was absolutely flawless. He wanted me to have his leftovers, so I was leaving him mine. I was leaving him a broken marriage, a legally vacated property, and the sudden terrifying realization that he had just insulted the woman who silently owned his entire world. I picked up my duffel bag, turned off the kitchen lights, and walked out the front door into the dark. A sleek black town car was already waiting for me at the end of the driveway, the engine purring softly in the quiet night. The cool Atlanta air hit my face, smelling of pine trees and absolute unrestrained freedom. I handed my bag to the driver, slid into the luxurious back seat, and did not look back at the mansion even once as the car pulled away. Let Marcus and Trent enjoy their expensive steaks and their shallow, arrogant toasts. Tomorrow morning, Marcus Sterling was going to wake up with a terrible hangover and realize he was entirely, undeniably homeless. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Atlanta, casting a warm golden glow across the imported silk sheets. I sat at the expansive mahogany dining table near the balcony, wearing a plush white hotel robe, holding a delicate porcelain cup of dark roast coffee. Far below me, the city was just waking up, completely unaware of the massive financial earthquake I was about to trigger. My phone, resting face up on the polished wood surface, suddenly shattered the quiet luxury of the room. The screen flashed fiercely with an incoming call. The caller ID read Marcus. I did not rush to pick it up. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, bitter flavor. I let it ring 3 times, making him wait before I calmly reached out and tapped the speakerphone icon. The audio quality of the phone speaker immediately distorted Marcus's voice, making him sound tiny, frantic, and pathetically desperate. "Are you out of your absolute mind?" he screamed, the volume so loud it practically rattled the porcelain saucer. I woke up with a pounding headache to find a pile of fake legal documents sitting on top of my dinner. "You think this is funny? You think you can just pack your cheap bags and walk out on me without a dime to your name?" If a camera were capturing this exact moment, it would execute a slow, low-angle orbit right around my chair. The lens would circle me from below, framing my completely serene, unbothered expression against the towering, powerful skyline of the city behind me. This visual of absolute grounded authority would stand in sharp, magnificent contrast to the tinny, erratic noise pouring out of the phone speaker. I did not interrupt him. I just let his fragile ego completely unravel in real time. "You listen to me, you ungrateful nobody!" Marcus continued to rage, his voice cracking with a mixture of hangover pain and genuine panic. "I am the chief executive officer now. I have power. I have connections. I am going to make sure you never work in this city again. I am calling the bank right this second to cancel your supplementary credit card. Let us see how long you last out there on the streets before you come crawling back here on your knees begging me to take you back. You are going to be completely penniless by noon." The sheer delusion in his threats was almost poetic. He genuinely believed that the silver piece of plastic he had magnanimously allowed me to carry with its insulting $2,000 monthly limit was my only lifeline to the modern world. He had no idea that I used that card exclusively to buy groceries and mundane household supplies just to maintain my cover story. I placed my coffee cup down with a soft clink. I did not offer a single word of defense or explanation. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my actual credit card. It was not silver. It was heavy matte black titanium. The legendary Centurion card issued only by exclusive invitation to clients whose net worth exceeded the comprehension of men like Marcus Sterling. I dropped the heavy metal card onto the mahogany table. It landed with a solid, authoritative thud that the phone microphone absolutely picked up. What was that noise? Marcus demanded, his breathing heavy and ragged over the line. Are you even listening to me? I am cutting you off. You are dead in this town. While he continued to hyperventilate about his perceived power, I opened my secure encrypted laptop. I logged directly into the private executive portal for Apex Vanguard. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard. I bypassed the standard authorization protocols using my founder credentials. I navigated straight to the Distressed Assets Division. Marcus was currently boasting about his new position as CEO of a health technology company, completely oblivious to the fact that his company was bleeding cash and sitting on a mountain of toxic, unpaid commercial debt. I selected his company from the corporate registry. I initiated a hostile buyout of all their outstanding high-yield debt instruments. The system prompted me for payment authorization to secure the initial collateral transfer. I typed in the numbers from my titanium black card. The transaction processed instantly. In less than 45 seconds, while my soon-to-be ex-husband was screaming into his phone about cutting off my grocery allowance, I had legally purchased the absolute majority of his company's toxic debt. I was now his company's largest and most aggressive creditor. I had the legal authority to freeze their operational accounts, demand immediate restructuring, or force them into sudden bankruptcy if they missed a single payment. He thought he was the king of the castle, but I had just bought the ground the castle was built on. I am not joking, Naomi Marcus shouted, his voice growing hoarse. You have exactly 1 hour to get back here and clean up this mess in the kitchen before I call my lawyers and destroy you. I looked at the glowing confirmation screen on my laptop. The transaction was fully settled. The trap was set and the jaws were securely locked. I leaned slightly closer to the phone microphone. The low-angle camera would stop its orbit right here, settling on a tight, commanding shot of my face. Good luck with the new job, Marcus, I said, my voice smooth as silk and cold as ice. Try not to run the company into the ground on your first day. I reached out and tapped the red button. The call disconnected instantly, cutting him off mid-sentence and plunging the suite back into perfectly peaceful silence. I picked up my coffee, took another sip, and turned my attention to the beautiful city skyline. The financial war had officially begun, and Marcus had absolutely no idea he had already lost the first battle. The screen of my phone had barely gone dark before it illuminated the polished mahogany table once again. The device buzzed aggressively against the wood, practically vibrating with the sheer unhinged anxiety of the caller. The name flashing on the display was Chloe. My biological younger sister, the ultimate family opportunist, and a woman who had spent her entire adult life meticulously constructing a false reality of wealth and prestige. I reached out and accepted the call, lifting the phone to my ear. I did not even have the chance to say hello before a piercing, frantic voice shattered the calm of my hotel suite. Are you completely out of your mind? Chloe shrieked, the volume so loud I had to physically pull the phone an inch away from my face. Vivian just called me in an absolute panic. Marcus is tearing the house apart. You served him divorce papers on the kitchen island. What is wrong with you, Naomi? You are humiliating us. You are ruining everything. If a cinema lens were capturing this exact moment, it would execute a violent, jarring whip pan. The camera would blur and snap back and forth between two entirely different universes. On one side, it would show Chloe frantically pacing the living room of her heavily mortgaged suburban house. Her voice pitched to a hysterical frequency, her face flushed with the terror of losing her proximity to high society. Then the camera would snap aggressively back to me. I was sitting perfectly still in a luxurious presidential suite, the morning light catching the gold rim of my coffee cup, a dark, utterly amused smirk resting effortlessly on my lips. The contrast in our energy was absolute. She was a woman drowning in a storm of her own making, and I was the one controlling the weather. You are a freelance accountant. Chloe continued to rant, her words tumbling over each other in her desperation to tear me down. You do not make real money. You do not have real power. Marcus was your only lifeline to a decent life, and he just got named Chief Executive Officer. He is going to be pulling in a massive 7-figure salary. And you decide today is the day to pack your cheap bags and demand half of his assets. You are nothing but an ungrateful gold digger who cannot stand to see her husband succeed. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the absurdity of her accusations wash over me. It was genuinely fascinating to analyze the psychology of a parasite. Chloe had always been this way. Even when we were children growing up on the south side of Atlanta, she was constantly searching for the biggest, most powerful host she could attach herself to. She resented our working-class background and viewed loyalty as a currency to be traded for social elevation. When she met Trent, a loud, arrogant white finance bro who threw around corporate buzzwords and wore custom-tailored suits, she thought she had hit the jackpot. She married him not for love, but for the illusion of generational wealth he so desperately projected. She sucked up to Vivian, enduring endless suffocating microaggressions and thinly veiled racial insults just so she could secure an invitation to the country club pool and pretend she belonged among the elite. She was willing to completely abandon her own sister just to keep her seat at a table that openly despised her. "Are you even listening to me?" Chloe demanded, her voice cracking with fury when I did not immediately respond. "Do not expect to come crying to me and Trent when your little rebellion blows up in your face. We are not bailing you out. In fact, you picked the absolute worst time to play the victim because Trent just won." "We just won." I raised an eyebrow, my smirk deepening. "Oh, did you now?" I asked, my voice calm, smooth, and laced with quiet danger. "Yes, we did," Chloe boasted, her tone dripping with unearned superiority. "Trent just secured his funding. He pitched the board of Apex Vanguard yesterday, and they loved him. They are giving him $5 million for his startup. $5 million, Naomi. It is a done deal. The paperwork is being drawn up as we speak. We are closing on a gated estate in Buckhead next month. My husband is a visionary tech founder, and Marcus is a corporate CEO. Our family is ascending to the top of this city, and you are throwing away your only chance to ride our coattails because you are too bitter and plain to play your part." The whip pan effect in my mind snapped back to my face. The absolute hilarious irony of her delusion was almost too beautiful to interrupt. Chloe was screaming at me, bragging about a $5 million seed round from Apex Vanguard, completely oblivious to the fact that the actual founder and sole decision-maker of that exact private equity firm was currently listening to her rant on the other end of the line. She was threatening me with my own money. "Trent told you it was a done deal?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "He came home, popped a bottle of cheap champagne, and told you the money was already in the bank." "Of course it is a done deal," she snapped, though I could hear the faintest microscopic tremor of insecurity in her voice. "He crushed the presentation. The investors said his algorithm was revolutionary. You would not understand it anyway, you just do taxes for local nail salons. But the point is, we are rich, and you are about to be a homeless divorcee begging for scraps." I leaned back in my plush chair, turning my gaze out toward the sprawling Atlanta skyline. "Chloe," I said softly, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a razor blade. "You have always been so desperate to wear other people's hand-me-down status. You defend Marcus because you are terrified of losing your connection to his new title. You blindly believe every ridiculous lie Trent feeds you, because the alternative is looking in the mirror and admitting you married a broke, arrogant fraud." "How dare you," she gasped, but I did not let her interrupt. "You are so eager to perform wealth that you never bother to check the receipts." I continued, my words striking with surgical precision. "Do you honestly think Vivian respects you? Just last week in that same group chat you love so much, she told Trent that your highlights look cheap and your manners belong in a dive bar. She keeps you around because you are an eager, pathetic audience for her vanity. You are not her equal. You are her court jester." There was a sudden, sharp silence on the line. I knew my words had hit the exact nerve she spent her entire life trying to hide. "You are lying," Chloe finally stammered, her voice shaking violently. "Vivian loves me. Trent is successful. You are just jealous." I took a final slow sip of my coffee. "I do not have the capacity to be jealous of an illusion, Chloe. But you should probably advise your visionary husband to double-check his inbox before you start picking out Italian marble countertops for a house you will never own. Corporate funding is an incredibly fragile thing. Venture capital firms do not just hand over $5 million without conducting a brutal forensic audit of the books. Sometimes, visionary founders lie about their user metrics. Sometimes they fake their cash flow, and sometimes those deals fall apart at the absolute highest level right before the ink dries. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, panic officially replacing her arrogance. "What do you know? Enjoy the celebration dinner at the Capitol Grill tonight, Chloe," I said, completely ignoring her question. "Order the most expensive steak on the menu, drink the imported champagne, take plenty of pictures for your social media, because by Monday morning, that lifestyle is going to be far outside your budget." I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the end call button, cutting off her frantic, high-pitched demands for an explanation. I tossed the phone back onto the table. The silence in the room returned pristine and deeply satisfying. Chloe wanted to play the role of the wealthy socialite riding on the coattails of men who built empires on a foundation of lies. She thought I was the weak link in the family, the boring sister who lacked ambition and drive. She was about to learn a devastating lesson about how true power operated in this city. I opened my laptop, pulling up the internal executive dashboard for Apex Vanguard. It was time to take a very close, unforgiving look at exactly what kind of revolutionary numbers Trent had presented to my junior analysts, and prepare the exact weapon I would use to destroy his fragile, pathetic ego. The camera of my reality shifts, positioning itself just over my right shoulder. The lens holds tight on the glowing high-resolution display of my encrypted laptop, capturing the exact moment the cold, sharp blue light of the screen reflects perfectly against the surface of my dark eyes. There is no warmth left in my gaze, only the terrifying absolute focus of an apex predator tracking its oblivious prey. I navigate past the standard login screens. I bypass the two-factor authentication protocols that bind the junior analysts and regular executives. I press my thumb against the biometric scanner embedded in the keyboard, and the system grants me access to the master founder dashboard of Apex Vanguard. The interface is sleek, minimalist, and contains the financial lifeblood of countless corporations across the country. I do not waste a single second browsing the broader market trends. I go straight to the venture capital acquisition queue. Right there, sitting proudly at the top of the pending final approval list, is a file labeled Project Zenith. It is the $5 million seed funding proposal submitted by my brother-in-law Trent. I click the file open. The executive summary is a masterpiece of corporate buzzwords and aggressive marketing jargon. Trent has woven a beautiful, completely imaginary tale about an artificial intelligence algorithm designed to revolutionize supply chain logistics. I can practically hear his loud, overly confident voice reciting these exact paragraphs in the boardroom, using his tall stature and expensive suit to intimidate the analysts into believing his manufactured hype. My junior team had attached a glowing recommendation to the file citing Trent's charisma and the projected exponential growth of his user base. They were young, eager to close a deal, and easily blinded by a man who looked and sounded the part of a Silicon Valley prodigy. But I am not a junior analyst. I am the woman who built this empire from the ground up, identifying toxic assets and ruthless scammers long before they could infect my portfolios. I ignore the colorful pie charts and the glossy presentation slides. I dig straight into the raw, unpolished data annexes. I open his cash flow statements, his user acquisition metrics, and his projected burn rate. It takes me exactly 4 minutes to find the rot. The man who spent the last 5 years explaining basic tax brackets to me at family barbecues, laughing at my modest career, had submitted a financial ledger so fundamentally flawed and arrogant that it was genuinely insulting. Trent was not just exaggerating his numbers. He was committing textbook wire fraud. I pull up his active user logs and cross-reference them with the server ping rates. The massive revolutionary user base he boasted about to my board is entirely artificial. He is paying overseas bot farms to generate dummy accounts and simulate active daily engagement. The software is a hollow shell echoing with fake traffic. I dive deeper, opening the corporate registry files linked to his primary vendors. He claims his startup is generating $50,000 a month in recurring revenue from 3 major corporate clients. I trace the routing numbers for those clients. They do not lead to legitimate businesses. They lead to 3 separate, newly formed limited liability companies registered in Delaware. I pull the incorporation documents for those companies and find the exact same registered agent for all three, Trent. He is taking out predatory short-term loans, funneling the cash through his own dummy corporations, and paying his own startup to manufacture the illusion of legitimate recurring revenue. It is a digital Ponzi scheme. It is a desperate, sloppy, and incredibly illegal shell game designed to secure $5 million of my money so he can buy a gated estate in Buckhead and maintain the illusion of extreme wealth for my sister. He was planning to take the seed money, siphon it off as executive compensation, and let the company quietly declare bankruptcy a year later, leaving Apex Vanguard holding an empty, worthless bag. A dark, quiet laugh escapes my lips, echoing in the stillness of the hotel suite. The absolute audacity of this man. He sat in my living room last Thanksgiving sipping expensive bourbon that Marcus bought, and told me that women like me simply lacked the risk tolerance required to understand high-level finance. He told me I was better off sticking to filing tax returns for nail salons. And here he is handing me the exact rope I am going to use to legally hang him. I could simply click the red reject button on the screen. I could decline the funding block his access to the capital and let him drown in his own accumulating debt. But simply denying him the money is not enough. Rejection just means he will take this fraudulent pitch deck to another venture capital firm and scam someone else. Trent does not just need to be stopped. He needs to be made into a permanent, highly visible example. He needs to face the terrifying, crushing weight of federal consequences. I open a highly secure, encrypted internal communication channel. I bypass the standard management hierarchy and open a direct line to the head of risk management and legal compliance for Apex Vanguard, a ruthless former federal prosecutor named David, who answers exclusively to me. I do not type a polite conversational email. I draft a severe zero-tolerance executive mandate. I attach the complete Project Zenith file to the message. I highlight the specific routing numbers of Trent's shell companies, and I attach the server logs proving the active user fraud. I type my instructions with rapid punishing keystrokes. I state that the attached seed round application contains overwhelming evidence of deliberate coordinated financial fraud and misrepresentation of corporate assets. I order the immediate suspension of all pending communications with the founder. I mandate a microscopic, completely unforgiving forensic audit of every single document Trent has ever submitted to this firm. Furthermore, I explicitly instruct the legal department to begin drafting a comprehensive fraud report. I demand that the moment our internal auditors officially confirm the shell game on paper, David is to immediately forward the entire file to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. I read over the message one final time. It is a masterclass in corporate execution. There is no emotion in the text, no hint of a personal vendetta. It is simply a vigilant founder protecting her firm from a criminal element. I move the cursor over the send button. I think about Chloe currently shopping for Italian marble countertops and bragging to her country club friends about her visionary husband. I think about Trent, standing in the middle of a high-end restaurant tonight, buying expensive rounds of drinks on credit, believing he has just conquered the world. They are dancing on the edge of a cliff, completely blind to the drop. I click send. The screen flashes briefly as the encrypted message vanishes into the internal network, hurtling toward the compliance department. The digital bullet has officially left the chamber. The first shot of the war has been fired, and it is going to blow a massive, irreparable hole right through the center of Trent's fragile, fraudulent reality. Come Monday morning, he will not be walking into an office to sign a $5 million contract. He will be walking into an interrogation room. I close the laptop screen, the sharp snap of the casing echoing with finality. I stand up from the mahogany table untying the belt of my plush hotel robe. It is time to get dressed. Marcus and his mother, Vivian, are currently preparing to host a lavish fake charity gala at their precious country club, ready to parade their new status in front of the Atlanta elite, while telling everyone I am too mentally unstable to attend. It would be an absolute tragedy to let them control that narrative for a single second longer. I walked toward the master bedroom closet, ready to select the perfect armor for my highly anticipated, completely uninvited public debut. Picture a slightly unsteady handheld camera weaving through the crystal chandelier-lit ballroom of the Piedmont Country Club. The lens pushes past waiters carrying silver trays of expensive champagne and catches the glittering reflections of diamond necklaces. The camera moves with a nervous, breathless energy, eavesdropping on the hushed, rapid whispers of Atlanta's most influential socialites. This is the stage Vivian Sterling built for her ultimate performance. The annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala was always Vivian's favorite weapon. It was an exclusive invite-only event designed to secure her position at the absolute peak of the city's high society. Tonight, the ballroom was packed with mayors, judges, hedge fund managers, and real estate moguls. But the main attraction was not the silent auction or the jazz band playing in the corner. The main attraction was the completely fabricated tragedy of my mental collapse. Vivian stood in the center of the room wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that cost more than a luxury car. She was holding court. She had perfectly orchestrated a circle of the most powerful gossips in the city, holding a pristine lace handkerchief halfway to her face to signal her deep, manufactured sorrow. The shaky camera lens focuses tightly on her mouth as she leans in to whisper to the police chief's wife. "It is just a tragedy," Vivian murmured, her voice carrying the exact right pitch of maternal heartbreak. "We tried absolutely everything to help her adjust to our world. We bought her the right clothes, we introduced her to the right people, but the pressure of Marcus's new position simply broke her mind. She is not well. She is completely unstable." The surrounding women gasped in theatrical sympathy, clutching their pearls and shaking their heads. One of them asked where I was, leaning forward, hungry for the scandalous details. Vivian let out a long, shuddering sigh, playing the role of the exhausted, deeply caring matriarch to absolute perfection. "She is isolated," Vivian lied effortlessly. "She had a total psychological breakdown yesterday afternoon. We had to bring in private medical professionals. She is suffering from severe clinical depression and delusions. She actually packed her bags and threatened Marcus, screaming things that made absolutely no sense. We are looking into a discreet long-term psychiatric facility upstate so she can get the heavy medication she so desperately needs." The whispers instantly rippled outward, spreading through the ballroom like a highly contagious virus. The handheld camera tracks the movement of the gossip, panning from group to group as the vicious lies are repeated and amplified. "I heard she could not handle the fact that Marcus is a CEO," now a woman by the bar whispered to a city councilman. "I heard she was always a little slow," someone from the south side, who just snapped under the weight of real money, another replied. Across the room, Marcus was playing his part flawlessly. He stood by the ice sculpture, nursing a glass of expensive scotch, looking incredibly solemn and brave. Older, wealthy men were coming up to him, clapping him firmly on the shoulder, offering their profound condolences for his difficult domestic situation. Marcus nodded stoically, looking down at his polished shoes, accepting their praise for being such a resilient, committed husband. He was soaking up the sympathy, using my fabricated mental illness to make himself look like a tragic hero who was sacrificing his own happiness to care for a deeply broken wife. The string quartet playing softly in the corner provided the perfect melancholic soundtrack to their performance. Waiters passed by with silver platters of caviar and truffles, completely ignored by the guests who were far more interested in consuming the juicy details of my demise. Marcus leaned in to speak with a prominent banking executive, his voice carrying just enough for the nearby tables to hear. He said it was the hardest day of his life, watching the woman he loved lose her grip on reality. He said he was focusing on his new role as CEO, just to keep his mind off the tragedy at home. The executive nodded solemnly, promising Marcus full support from his firm during this trying time. The hypocrisy was so thick it was practically choking the room. And then there was Chloe. My own sister was standing near the VIP tables, with Trent, both of them practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. Chloe was wearing a flashy sequined dress that was trying way too hard to look expensive. She was nodding along as Vivian spun her lies, actively validating the narrative that her own flesh and blood had lost her mind. Chloe actually told a group of investors that I had always been the jealous, unstable sibling, and that she and Trent were doing everything they could to support Marcus through this incredibly dark time. Trent was right beside her, handing out his business cards, boasting about his revolutionary startup, completely unaware that his company was currently bleeding out on an autopsy table at the federal level. They were all feeding on my supposed destruction. They were building themselves up by standing on the imaginary grave of my sanity. Vivian had calculated this perfectly. By painting me as a mentally unstable, depressed, and delusional woman, she completely discredited anything I might say in the future. If I tried to claim they were abusive, people would just shake their heads and say it was the depression talking. If I tried to ask for a fair divorce settlement, they would claim I was not of sound mind to manage my own finances. It was a brutal, incredibly effective social assassination. I knew exactly what the room looked like. I knew exactly what they were saying. I had spent 7 years studying the exact mechanics of Vivian's social warfare. She relied on the fact that the people in this room valued the illusion of perfection over the ugly reality of the truth. She relied on the assumption that a freelance accountant from a working-class neighborhood would simply hide in shame and let her control the narrative. But Vivian had made one catastrophic, unforgivable miscalculation. She assumed she was directing a tragedy about a weak, broken woman. She did not realize she had just set the stage for the most explosive, devastating corporate takeover this city had ever seen. The gossip was reaching its absolute peak. The pity for Marcus was at its maximum volume. The trap they had built for me was fully constructed and on public display. It was the exact, perfect moment for the ghost they were pitying to walk straight through the front doors. The heavy brass-handled oak doors of the Piedmont Country Club ballroom did not just open. They were pulled back simultaneously by 2 uniformed staff members who had no idea they were raising the curtain on the final act of Vivian Sterling's social reign. A backwards tracking shot would start right here, the lens pulling back smoothly, staying perfectly level with my chest, capturing the absolute predatory calm radiating from my face as I crossed the threshold. The camera glides backward down the center of the ballroom, matching the exact relentless rhythm of my Christian Louboutin stilettos clicking against the imported marble floor. I was not wearing clearance rack cardigans. I was wearing a vintage, breathtaking crimson-red Alexander McQueen haute couture gown that I had flown in from Paris 2 years ago and kept sealed in a garment bag for a moment, exactly like this. The silk draped across my body, like liquid fire, commanding attention and demanding respect. My hair was styled in immaculate, sharp waves. Diamonds rested against my collarbone, catching the light from the massive chandeliers overhead. I looked like a woman who could buy and sell every single person in that room with a single phone call. I looked like the absolute, undeniable opposite of a mental breakdown. The effect on the room was instantaneous and catastrophic. The cellist in the string quartet actually missed a note, creating a harsh, discordant screech that echoed through the sudden, suffocating silence. The hushed whispers about my supposed psychiatric collapse died in the throats of the elite socialites. You could hear the collective intake of breath. The women who had just been clutching their pearls in pity were now staring at me in absolute, undisguised awe. I did not look delusional. I looked like royalty. I locked eyes with Marcus first. He was still standing by the ice sculpture, frozen mid-sentence. The glass of expensive scotch slipped from his fingers and shattered against the floor. The sharp crash of crystal breaking was the only sound in the massive room. His face drained of blood, turning a sickly ashen gray. The tragic brave husband routine evaporated instantly, replaced by the sheer naked terror of a man realizing his prey had just locked him inside the cage. But it was Vivian who reacted with pure, unadulterated panic. Her carefully constructed narrative of the broken, unstable daughter-in-law was currently walking toward the VIP section, looking like a billionaire. She had to stop me before I reached the major investors and the police chief's wife. She abandoned her circle of gossips and lunged toward me, her emerald green gown swishing frantically as she desperately tried to intercept my path. She blocked my way, positioning her body to shield me from the view of the most important guests. She stretched out her hands, plastering a fake, panicked smile on her face for the audience, pretending she was rushing to comfort a sick relative. "Oh, my poor, sweet Naomi," she cried out, her voice pitched loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "You are so confused, honey. You should not be out of bed. The doctor said you need to rest." As she closed the distance, her hands darted out to grab my forearm. Her manicured nails dug into my skin like claws. The fake smile remained glued to her face, but her eyes were wild, feral, and filled with venom. She leaned in close, bringing her face inches from mine, dropping the volume so only I could hear the pure, desperate hatred in her voice. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, her breath hot against my cheek. "You ungrateful little street trash. Get out of this club right now before I call security and tell them you are having a violent, psychotic episode. You are humiliating Marcus. I will have you thrown in a psychiatric ward by midnight, and I will make sure they throw away the key. Turn around and walk out, or I swear to God I will destroy whatever is left of your pathetic life." I did not struggle against her grip. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not lower my voice to protect her secret. I looked down at her manicured hand digging into my arm, and then I looked directly into her terrified eyes. I let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. "Vivian?" I said, my voice carrying a smooth, resonant authority that projected effortlessly into the silent room. "If you do not remove your hand from my gown in the next 3 seconds, I will buy this entire country club tomorrow morning, just so I can fire the management team that allowed you through the front door." Vivian froze, her eyes widened in absolute shock. I did not sound crazy. I sounded like a woman issuing a legally binding, financially backed threat. She instinctively snatched her hand back as if the silk of my dress had suddenly caught fire. I stepped gracefully around her paralyzed form, dismissing her entirely, and turned my attention to the breathless audience surrounding us. I swept my gaze over the judges, the banking executives, and the socialites who had just been feasting on Vivian's lies. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my tone warm, engaging, and dripping with high society polish. "Please accept my deepest apologies for the slight delay. I was finalizing a rather substantial corporate acquisition, and the paperwork simply refused to wait. But I assure you my mental health is in spectacular condition. In fact, I have never seen things more clearly than I do tonight." I caught sight of Chloe and Trent standing near the VIP tables. Chloe looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Trent was sweating, tugging at his collar, sensing the massive shift in the room's power dynamic, but not yet understanding that the financial guillotine was hanging directly over his own neck. Vivian was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she tried to salvage her ruined performance. "Naomi is having an episode," she stammered, looking desperately at the police chief's wife. "She does not know what she is saying. We need to get her medical help immediately." Nobody was looking at Vivian with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with deep, uncomfortable suspicion. The illusion of the perfect sterling matriarch had cracked wide open, revealing the desperate, manipulative liar underneath. The crowd parted naturally as I continued my walk, treating Vivian like an invisible obstacle I had already overcome. I did not engage with her pathetic attempts to regain control. I had a much bigger target in my sights. I locked eyes with the prominent banking executives Marcus had been trying to impress, smoothed the skirt of my crimson gown, and walked directly toward the absolute center of their false empire, ready to burn it to the ground in front of everyone they respected. I moved with the fluid grace of a woman who owned the ground she walked on. The velvet-roped VIP section was just ahead, guarded by a few heavily built security men who instinctively stepped aside as I approached. This was the inner sanctum of the gala, the designated space where the real power brokers of Atlanta congregated to smoke expensive cigars and trade corporate secrets. Marcus had spent months networking just to earn a standing spot near the edge of this circle. As I prepared to enter, Trent detached himself from Chloe's side and stepped directly into my path. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use his height to physically intimidate me. His face was flushed with a mixture of cheap alcohol and unearned arrogance. He looked me up and down, his eyes narrowing as he tried to reconcile the stunning couture gown I was wearing with his preconceived notion of the pathetic, boring sister-in-law. "Naomi, you need to turn around and walk right back out the service exit," Trent commanded, lowering his voice into a condescending, aggressive sneer. This area is strictly reserved for accredited investors and executive leadership. You are completely out of your depth. You are going to ruin Marcus's celebration, and more importantly, you are going to jeopardize my $5 million venture capital deal. Go home before you embarrass yourself and drag our family name through the mud. I stopped precisely 2 feet away from him. I did not shrink back. I looked at the heavy beads of sweat forming along his hairline. I noticed the desperate nervous tremor in his hands as he clutched his crystal glass. He was projecting extreme confidence, but he was leaking absolute terror. "Your $5 million deal, Trent?" I asked, allowing my voice to carry just enough for the surrounding executives to hear. He smirked, glancing back over his shoulder to ensure the wealthy men at the nearby tables were watching him handle the situation. "Yes, Naomi. Real money. High-level finance. Apex Vanguard is backing my visionary startup. The board absolutely loved my pitch. So I strongly suggest you let the adults talk business and go find a quiet corner to deal with whatever emotional breakdown you are currently having." I let a soft, terrifyingly cold laugh escape my lips. I was just about to tell him exactly what my risk management team was doing to his visionary pitch deck when the dense crowd behind him suddenly parted. They did not just step aside. They separated with the kind of frantic, respectful urgency reserved for royalty. The heavy, unmistakable presence of absolute power entered the circle. It was Elias Thorne. Elias was a legendary billionaire, a titan of real estate and private equity, whose influence stretched far beyond the borders of Georgia. He was the kind of man who could bankrupt a regional bank just by moving his checking account. Men like Marcus and Trent spent their entire pathetic careers begging for 5 minutes of his time, hoping for a mere handshake that could validate their existence. Elias stepped into the VIP area. Trent immediately straightened his posture, puffing out his chest, even further, opening his mouth to introduce himself and pitch his ridiculous startup. Elias did not even glance at Trent. He walked right past my brother-in-law, treating him like an invisible, entirely irrelevant piece of furniture. Elias stopped directly in front of me. The music in the room seemed to fade entirely into the background. The legendary billionaire, a man feared by Wall Street executives, bowed his head in a deep, genuine gesture of profound reverence. "Naomi," Elias said, his booming, gravelly voice echoing through the dead, silent ballroom. "The undisputed queen of private equity. I was hoping you would make an appearance tonight. My team just reviewed the terms of your latest hostile takeover of that bloated medical technology firm. It was absolutely brilliant maneuvering. You executed that buyout with ruthless perfection. If there were a camera capturing the psychological reality of this exact moment, it would violently snap into a severe Dutch angle. The entire horizon line of the ballroom would dramatically slant. The sparkling crystal chandeliers would appear to hang diagonally against the ceiling. The lens would tilt sharply, perfectly illustrating the absolute mind-shattering vertigo striking Marcus, Vivian, and Trent simultaneously. The floor was completely dropping out from underneath them. The world as they knew it was flipping upside down, defying gravity and logic, leaving them suspended in a terrifying free-fall of realization. Trent's jaw actually dropped open. The color vanished from his face so fast, he looked like a corpse. Across the room, Vivian grabbed the edge of a cocktail table to physically keep herself from collapsing to the floor. Marcus looked as if all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of his lungs, his eyes darting frantically between my face and the billionaire who had just bowed to me. Elias finally turned his attention to the pale, sweating man standing frozen beside me. He looked Trent up and down with an expression of sheer aristocratic distaste. "And who is this man blocking your path?" Naomi Elias asked, his tone dripping with lethal authority. "Does he work for the venue? Do you need my private security team to remove him from your presence?" I smiled warmly at Elias, then turned my dark, unforgiving gaze back to Trent. "No, Elias," I replied, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room. "This is Trent. He is just a very confused, deeply desperate man who thinks he secured seed funding from my company." Elias raised an eyebrow, a spark of dark amusement flashing in his eyes. "Ah," Elias said, realization dawning on his face. "This must be the fraudulent tech founder you were talking about. The one you ordered your compliance department to freeze this morning. I heard the federal authorities are already drawing up the arrest warrants for wire fraud. The collective gasp from the surrounding crowd of elite investors was audible. The prominent bankers who had just been shaking Marcus's hand physically took a step away from him, instantly treating the Sterling family like radioactive waste. Trent began to shake violently, his crystal glass slipping from his fingers and shattering on the marble floor, joining the remnants of Marcus's broken drink. The illusion was completely destroyed. The pathetic, arrogant men who had spent years treating me like an uneducated burden were now standing in the wreckage of their own fraudulent lives, exposed in front of the most powerful people in the city. And I had not even delivered my final blow. I turned away from Trent's crumbling facade, dismissing him entirely as he fell to his knees in the center of the ballroom. I did not spare a single glance for Marcus, who was now desperately trying to back away into the shadows, or Vivian, who was clutching her chest as her precious social standing evaporated into thin air. Instead, I walked gracefully toward the main stage where the charity director was standing, completely paralyzed by the unfolding drama. I ascended the short stairs, the heavy silk of my crimson gown trailing behind me like a burning flame. I stepped up to the microphone stand. The audio feedback whined for a fraction of a second before the entire ballroom fell into a hushed, absolute silence. Every billionaire judge and corporate magnate in the room was hanging on my next breath. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a vital cause," I said, my voice resonating with supreme clarity through the massive speakers. "The Sterling family has certainly put on quite an entertaining display this evening. However, I believe we are all here for a much higher purpose than cheap social theater. We are here to fund the future of our community." I reached into my clutch and retrieved a sleek leather checkbook alongside my heavy fountain pen. I rested the checkbook on the wooden podium. As a woman who built her own financial empire from the ground up, I understand the critical importance of proper capital. I continued, my gaze sweeping over the mesmerized audience. "Therefore, it is my absolute privilege to make a direct, unconditional donation to tonight's charity." I signed my name with sharp, aggressive strokes. I did not write Naomi Sterling. That name was officially dead to me. I tore the check from the booklet and handed it directly to the trembling charity director. He looked down at the numbers, his eyes widening to the size of saucers, before he breathlessly leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director stammered, his voice shaking with pure shock, "we have just received a phenomenal, record-breaking donation of $1 million from Ms. Naomi Hayes." The ballroom erupted. The applause was deafening, echoing off the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. It was not polite golf claps. It was a roaring, thunderous standing ovation from the most powerful people in Atlanta. If a cinematic camera were capturing the final moments of this scene, it would execute a sweeping, majestic crane shot. The lens would detach from my eye level and smoothly rise high into the air, pulling back and up toward the vaulted ceiling of the ballroom. Looking straight down from this godlike perspective, the visual hierarchy of the room would be undeniably clear. I stood elevated on the stage, bathed in warm golden light, surrounded by an ocean of elite executives fiercely applauding my real name. Far below, pushed to the absolute dark margins of the frame, the Sterling family looked like tiny, insignificant insects. Marcus, Vivian, Trent, and Chloe were huddled together in the shadows, completely isolated, stripped of their fake power, and suffocating under the crushing weight of their own ruin. I did not stay to bask in the adulation. I handed the microphone back to the director, offered one final gracious smile to the cheering crowd, and walked down the stage steps. The sea of billionaires and socialites parted respectfully to let me through. I walked straight out the heavy brass doors of the Piedmont Country Club, stepping into the cool, crisp night air, where my private car was already waiting, leaving the smoldering ashes of the Sterling family legacy far behind me. Monday morning arrived with the sharp, unforgiving brightness of a reality check. Trent sat in the glass-walled conference room of his rented Midtown Atlanta office space. He had specifically leased this expensive real estate on credit banking entirely on the $5 million wire transfer from Apex Vanguard that was scheduled to clear by 9 o'clock. He was wearing his signature custom-tailored suit, his feet resting arrogantly on the polished conference table, constantly refreshing his corporate banking application. He was fully prepared to walk out of this office a multi-million-dollar tech founder. The digital clock on his screen struck exactly 9. Trent smiled, anticipating the massive influx of capital. Instead of a deposit notification, a priority email alert sliced across his screen. The sender address did not belong to the enthusiastic junior analysts he had been manipulating for weeks. The sender was the Apex Vanguard Global Office of Legal Compliance and Risk Management. The subject line was stamped in stark red capital letters. It read, "Notice of immediate funding termination and pending civil action for financial fraud." Trent lowered his feet to the floor. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a deep, sudden crease of confusion. He clicked open the email. The language inside was not a standard corporate rejection. It was a brutal forensic dissection of his entire criminal existence. The document outlined with terrifying microscopic precision the exact mechanics of his digital Ponzi scheme. It listed the precise routing numbers of his 3 Delaware shell companies. It attached the server logs exposing his overseas bot farms and the fabricated daily active user metrics. The email formally declared that Project Zenith was effectively dead. But the final paragraph was the one that stopped his heart completely. It stated that Apex Vanguard had already frozen his preliminary escrow accounts and officially forwarded his entire unredacted pitch deck to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for aggressive prosecution of wire fraud. This is the exact moment the visual pacing fractures into a series of violent, rapid, quick cuts. The camera snaps aggressively between the glowing laptop screen detailing his federal crimes and Trent's face rapidly draining of all blood. Snap. The cursor hovering over the word fraud. Snap. A bead of cold sweat dripping down Trent's temple. Snap. The glaring red text of the email. Snap. Trent's chest heaving as he struggles to pull oxygen into his lungs. The silence in the glass conference room is completely shattered by the frantic vibrating ring of his cell phone hitting the table. The caller ID flashed Chloe. Trent's hands were shaking so violently, he dropped the phone twice before finally swiping to answer. He brought the device to his ear, his throat completely paralyzed. "Trent, what is going on?" Chloe screamed through the speaker, her voice pitching into absolute hysteria. "I am standing in the design showroom right now. I just tried to put down the $50,000 deposit for the imported Italian marble countertops for the Buckhead estate. The card declined. I tried the other 3 premium cards. They all declined. The bank representative just told me our accounts are locked pending a federal fraud investigation. What did you do?" Trent opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, breathless wheeze came out. The walls of his expensive rented office were physically closing in on him. He looked out the glass walls at the 3 junior developers he had hired on empty promises, completely unaware that their boss was about to be indicted. He frantically grabbed his computer mouse and tried to log into the back-end portals of his Delaware shell companies to salvage any remaining funds. The access was completely denied. Red error messages blocked every single attempt. He was entirely locked out of his own scam. "Trent, answer me right now!" Chloe shrieked, the sound of her public humiliation echoing in the background. "The showroom manager is looking at me like I am a criminal. You said the $5 million was secured. You said we were rich. Call the bank and fix this immediately." "The money is gone!" Chloe. Trent finally choked out, his voice cracking into a high, terrified pitch. "The venture capital firm. They found out about the user logs. They found the shell companies. They sent everything to the federal authorities. We have absolutely nothing. I am looking at federal prison time." A sharp, terrified gasp echoed from Chloe's end of the line. The reality of her fake, glamorous life collapsing instantly shattered her mind. She did not offer him a single word of comfort. She did not promise to stand by him through the legal battle. She acted exactly as a parasite does when the host organism dies. She immediately sought a new source of survival. "You lied to me!" Chloe screamed, her voice dripping with pure, concentrated venom. "You arrogant broke fraud! You dragged me into this. I am calling Marcus right now. He is a CEO. He has real money. He will hire a legal team and protect me from your spectacular mess. Do not ever speak to me again." The line went dead. Trent sat in the suffocating silence, the dial tone ringing in his ears, realizing that his wife had just abandoned him the second the illusion of his wealth evaporated. He slammed his fists against the desk, knocking his expensive coffee cup to the floor, but the fragile display of anger quickly melted back into raw, paralyzing terror. He was going to lose everything: his freedom, his reputation, and his entire future, all because he thought he could outsmart the system. Across the city, Chloe was frantically stabbing at her phone screen, dialing Marcus with trembling fingers. She stood outside the luxury design showroom, completely ignoring the stares of the wealthy patrons walking past her. She needed her brother-in-law to save her. She needed the powerful corporate executive to deploy his massive resources and shield her from the fallout of Trent's crimes. Marcus picked up on the fifth ring. His voice sounded hollow, distant, and completely destroyed. "Hello, Marcus." "Thank God," Chloe gasped, tears of panic streaming down her face, completely ruining her expensive makeup. "Trent is going to prison. He lied about the startup funding. The venture capital firm caught him committing fraud, and they froze all our accounts. You have to help me. You have to use your CEO connections to get me a lawyer and distance me from his crimes. We need your money right now." There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. Chloe waited for the reassuring, arrogant voice of the man who always threw money at his problems. She waited for the golden child of the Sterling family to tell her everything was going to be fine. "I cannot help you," Chloe. Marcus whispered, his voice completely devoid of its usual booming confidence. He sounded like a man standing in the center of a burning building, watching the flames consume the walls. "What do you mean you cannot help me?" Chloe shrieked, stamping her foot on the pavement. "You are a chief executive officer. You make millions." "I do not have anything either," Marcus replied, his voice breaking. "Naomi is gone. She took everything. I woke up this morning to find out she completely controls the holding company that owns my house. She canceled my secondary credit lines. She is not a freelance accountant, Chloe. She is a financial monster, and she has completely dismantled my life. I am currently packing my things into garbage bags because her private security team just gave me a 2-hour notice to vacate the premises." Chloe froze. The phone slowly slipped away from her ear as the magnitude of the catastrophe fully registered. Her husband was facing federal wire fraud charges. Her powerful, wealthy brother-in-law was currently being evicted from his own mansion by the very sister they had spent the entire night mocking and humiliating. The safety net was completely gone. The Sterling family empire was not just falling apart. It had been systematically and ruthlessly detonated from the inside out. Back in his glass office, Trent slumped forward, resting his forehead against the cool mahogany desk. The quick cuts of the camera flashed one final time in his mind. A tight shot of the federal reporting warning on his computer screen. A shot of his shaking, clammy hands. A shot of the empty, disconnected phone. The trap had sprung with flawless precision. There was no escape, no negotiation, and absolutely no mercy coming his way. The $5 million dream had instantly morphed into a federal nightmare, and he had no one to blame but his own staggering arrogance. The afternoon sun beat down on the pristine driveway of the Buckhead mansion as Marcus's luxury sports car rolled to a confident stop. He killed the engine, turning to flash a dazzling, arrogant smile at the woman sitting in the passenger seat. Her name was Vanessa, a flashy marketing executive he had been secretly seeing for the past 6 months. She was exactly the kind of woman he thought a newly appointed chief executive officer deserved, draped in obvious designer labels and utterly obsessed with social climbing. Marcus had spent the entire drive boasting about how he had finally gotten rid of his boring, uncultured wife. He told Vanessa that Naomi had thrown a pathetic temper tantrum the night before, leaving some fake, poorly drafted divorce and eviction papers on the kitchen counter before running away. He genuinely believed Naomi was currently crying in some cheap motel, leaving this massive $800,000 estate completely to him. Marcus stepped out of the car, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit jacket, eager to show off his domain. He led Vanessa up the sweeping brick pathway to the heavy oak front doors. He reached for the digital keypad, his fingers moving with the practiced muscle memory of a man who owned the world. He punched in his personalized access code. Instead of the satisfying mechanical click of the deadbolt releasing a harsh buzzing error tone pierced the air. The keypad flashed a solid, unforgiving red. Marcus frowned, letting out a short, dismissive laugh. He told Vanessa the system was probably just glitching from the overnight software update. He cracked his knuckles and typed the sequence again, pressing the numbers with more force. The keypad buzzed again, solid red. A sharp flicker of irritation crossed his face. He slammed his palm against the heavy oak door, shouting that the smart home system was always malfunctioning. He reached into his pocket to retrieve his physical override key, fully prepared to manually force his way inside. But before he could even slide the brass key into the lock, the heavy door swung open from the inside. Marcus instantly froze. Standing in the doorway was not a confused housekeeper or a smart home technician. It was a massive, incredibly imposing man wearing a tactical black uniform. A badge on his chest clearly identified him as an operative for an elite private security firm. Two more similarly dressed guards materialized on the wraparound porch, moving with silent, terrifying precision to flank Marcus and Vanessa. If a camera were capturing this exact sequence, the smooth cinematic stability of the previous scenes would completely vanish. The visual style would instantly switch to a gritty, unsteady handheld camera. The lens would bounce and shake slightly with every breath Marcus took, creating a sickening, visceral sense of claustrophobia and panic. The frame would stay aggressively tight on his face, perfectly capturing the moment his arrogant superiority began to rot into raw terror. "Excuse me," Marcus demanded, puffing out his chest and attempting to project the booming authority of a corporate CEO. "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing inside my house? Step aside right now before I call the Atlanta police and have you all arrested for breaking and entering." The lead security officer did not flinch. He did not step aside. He looked at Marcus with the cold, dead-eyed indifference of a man who dealt with hostile trespassers every single day. "Mr. Sterling," the officer said, his voice flat and devoid of any respect. "You are currently trespassing on private property. You have exactly 2 minutes to return to your vehicle and vacate the premises before we are legally authorized to physically remove you." Marcus let out a loud, incredulous bark of laughter, looking back at Vanessa to ensure she was watching him assert his dominance. "Trespassing. I am the owner of this estate. My name is on the mortgage documents. My wife left some ridiculous fake eviction notice on my kitchen counter last night as a pathetic joke. You are completely out of your depth here." Marcus reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out the crumpled, pristine legal document Naomi had left resting on the leftover chicken. He shoved the paper directly toward the officer's chest. "Read it yourself. It is a complete fabrication. Naomi does not have the power to evict me from my own home." The security officer did not even look at the paper. Instead, he pulled a thick official legal binder from behind the doorframe and held it open for Marcus to see. "I highly suggest you read the actual deed to this property, Mr. Sterling," the officer stated, tapping a heavily stamped page with his index finger. "This estate is solely owned by a real estate holding company named Sterling Horizon, and according to these expedited, legally binding transfer documents filed and certified by the county court this morning, Sterling Horizon is a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Vanguard. The chief executive officer of Apex Vanguard has formally revoked your tenancy. You do not own this house. You have never owned this house. You are an unauthorized occupant, and your presence here is now a criminal offense." The handheld camera jerks forward, pushing uncomfortably close into Marcus's face. His eyes dart frantically across the official county stamps, the raised seals, and the terrifying, undeniable corporate logos of Apex Vanguard. His brain violently struggles to process the information. Naomi, his quiet, boring wife who filed taxes from home, was not just an employee of Apex Vanguard. The documents clearly listed her as the sole founder and managing director. The air completely left his lungs. The foundation of his entire reality cracked and shattered into a million jagged pieces. He had spent 7 years treating the owner of a private equity empire like an unpaid maid. Before Marcus could even utter a single syllable, the massive front doors were pulled wide open. A crew of professional movers marched out onto the porch, carrying large, heavy-duty industrial garbage bags. They did not handle the bags with care. They swung them aggressively over the railing, tossing them directly onto the pristine manicured front lawn. The bags hit the grass with heavy thuds bursting open upon impact. Out spilled the entirety of Marcus's carefully curated, desperately expensive life. Custom Italian suits he had purchased to impress investors tumbled into the dirt. Silk ties, imported leather shoes, and expensive colognes scattered across the landscaping. They were throwing his belongings out like toxic waste. "What are you doing?" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. "Stop touching my things. Those suits cost thousands of dollars. You are ruining them." He scrambled off the porch, falling to his knees on the grass, frantically trying to gather his expensive clothes and shove them back into the torn plastic bags. The handheld camera follows his descent, shaking and tilting wildly to capture the absolute pathetic humiliation of a man crawling in the dirt for his material possessions. He looked up, his face red, his eyes watering with a mixture of rage and profound panic. "Vanessa, help me grab these," Marcus pleaded, reaching out toward his mistress, but Vanessa had already taken 3 large steps backward. The alluring, wealthy CEO she thought she was dating had just evaporated. In his place was a sweating, screaming man, being legally evicted from a house he did not even own, crawling on his lawn while security guards watched him with open disgust. She looked at his scattered, wrinkled suits, then looked at the cold, intimidating faces of the security team. "I am calling an Uber," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with absolute revulsion. "Do not ever call my phone again, Marcus." She turned on her heel and practically sprinted down the driveway, desperate to distance herself from the radioactive blast radius of his ruined life. Marcus stayed on his knees, clutching a dirt-stained silk tie in his trembling hands. The sheer magnitude of his destruction was finally crashing down on him. Naomi had not just left him. She had systematically stripped him of his sanctuary, his dignity, and his false wealth in broad daylight. He was sitting on a lawn in Buckhead, surrounded by garbage bags, staring at the locked doors of an empire he never actually controlled. The panic attack seized his chest, squeezing his heart until he could barely breathe, leaving him completely paralyzed in the wreckage of his own monumental arrogance. Marcus remained kneeling in the damp grass, watching the red taillights of Vanessa's ride-share vehicle disappear into the dark. The 3 private security operatives stood on the porch like statues, watching him with cold, professional indifference. Marcus slowly scrambled to his feet. His $1,000 custom suit was completely ruined, smeared with soil and grass stains. His hands were violently trembling, but a toxic, desperate surge of adrenaline slowly began to replace his paralyzing panic. He refused to be defeated by the woman he had spent 7 years belittling. He frantically started to rationalize his failure. Yes, she had outsmarted him on the real estate deed. Yes, she somehow controlled the holding company, but he was still a brilliant, highly connected corporate executive. He was still the newly appointed chief executive officer of a major health technology conglomerate. That position came with exclusive stock options, a massive base salary, and immense industry power. He could easily afford to hire a team of ruthless, bloodthirsty divorce attorneys to drag Naomi through years of agonizing litigation. He would bury her in legal fees and rip her precious private equity firm to shreds in civil court. He pulled his smartphone from his jacket pocket. The screen was cracked from when he had dropped it on the brick pathway earlier, but it still functioned. His thumbs smashed against the digital keyboard with aggressive, violent force. He poured every ounce of his wounded ego into typing out his ultimate declaration of war. "You think you actually won because you played a cheap trick with the real estate paperwork?" He typed, his breathing heavy and ragged in the cool night air. "You are nothing but a glorified bookkeeper playing dress-up. I am the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation now. I am going to make 10 times the value of this stupid house in my first year alone. I am hiring the most vicious corporate lawyers in the state. I will strip you of your company, drag your name through the mud, and leave you with absolutely nothing. Wait until I drag you into court. Enjoy your temporary victory because I am going to destroy you." He hit send. He stared at the glowing green text bubble on his cracked screen, feeling a pathetic, hollow sense of triumph wash over him. He genuinely believed he still held the ultimate trump card. If a camera were directing this exact transition, it would execute a flawless, highly stylized focus pull. The lens would push in for an extreme macro shot of Marcus's shattered phone screen hovering directly over that arrogant text message. The bright green bubble would fill the entire cinematic frame. Then, in a fraction of a second, the visual focus would aggressively shift. The cracked glass and the humiliating background of the Buckhead lawn would blur into complete oblivion. The sharp pixels of the text message would dissolve instantly, morphing and sharpening into the pristine, unblemished screen of a different smartphone. The focus snaps perfectly onto my device. The camera slowly tilts upward, revealing me sitting in the luxurious, climate-controlled back seat of my private town car as it glides smoothly through the glowing streets of downtown Atlanta. I am holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, the heavy red silk of my couture gown pooling beautifully around my legs. The cabin of the vehicle is perfectly silent, insulated from the noise of the city outside. I look down at the threatening message displaying on my screen. I do not gasp. I do not alert my security detail or hastily draft an email to my legal team. I simply read the desperate, empty threats of a ruined man and let a slow, chilling smirk pull at the corners of my mouth. The sheer, magnificent irony of his text message is almost too delicious to consume all at once. Marcus is clinging to his new CEO title like a life raft in a hurricane, completely oblivious to the fact that his life raft is actually an anchor forged from solid lead. He thinks he earned that corner office. He thinks the corporate board recognized his visionary leadership. I turn my gaze back to the window, watching the towering skyscrapers of the financial district slide past the tinted glass. I know exactly what Marcus does not. His sudden, miraculous promotion to chief executive officer was never based on his talent, his networking skills, or his business acumen. It was a highly calculated, lethal corporate maneuver orchestrated entirely by Apex Vanguard. I had deliberately instructed my board of directors to push his promotion through and place him in the absolute highest seat of power just before our final forensic audit. By accepting the CEO title, Marcus intentionally made himself the sole legal signatory and the primary liable officer for the mountain of toxic debt, vendor fraud, and embezzlement his predecessors had left behind. He was not being crowned king of a health technology empire. He was being positioned as the ultimate corporate scapegoat, legally bound to take the fall for years of financial crimes. I lock my phone screen and drop the device carelessly into my designer clutch. Let Marcus send his pathetic threats from the sidewalk. Let him dream of his massive salary and his imaginary team of lawyers. He is rushing headfirst into a legal slaughterhouse with a blindfold on. I reach into my leather briefcase resting on the seat beside me and pull out the finalized audit reports for tomorrow morning. The financial war is already over, and I am deeply looking forward to watching the steel doors of my boardroom lock right behind him. The morning sun breaks over the Atlanta skyline, piercing the floor-to-ceiling windows of my actual residence, a secure tri-level penthouse in Midtown that Marcus never knew existed. The events of the gala and the chaotic eviction are already fading into the past, replaced entirely by the clinical, razor-sharp focus required for the day ahead. Today is not about social maneuvering or public humiliation. Today is about corporate execution. If a camera were mapping the geography of this specific moment, it would execute a flawless, perfectly stabilized slider shot. The lens would glide smoothly and horizontally across the surface of my massive tempered glass desk. As it tracks sideways, the camera captures the physical weight of my strategy. It glides past thick, leather-bound dossiers stamped with the Apex Vanguard seal. It pans over printed spreadsheets stained with red ink, highlighting catastrophic cash flow deficits, fraudulent vendor invoices, and the staggering mountain of toxic debt belonging to the health technology conglomerate Marcus now officially commands. The slider shot continues its steady, relentless path, passing over the signed, legally binding employment contract that Marcus eagerly endorsed just 48 hours ago. The very contract that explicitly names him the sole liable officer for all historical financial discrepancies discovered post-merger. He signed away his legal immunity because he was too intoxicated by the title of Chief Executive Officer to hire a competent lawyer to read the fine print. The camera's horizontal journey finally comes to a smooth, definitive stop, resting on a tight, uncompromising close-up of my face. There is no trace of the exhausted, subservient wife left in my features. My eyes are dark, resolute, and completely devoid of mercy. I stand up from the desk, moving toward the expansive dressing room to select my armor for the final hunt. The crimson silk gown from the country club was designed to shock and awe the social elite, to burn down the false narrative Vivian had constructed. But today requires an entirely different aesthetic. Today requires the uniform of a financial apex predator. I bypass the colorful garments and reach for a bespoke midnight black tailored suit. The fabric is heavy and imported, the cut aggressively sharp. It features structured shoulders and razor-straight lines that project absolute, undeniable authority. I slip into a crisp white silk blouse and button the blazer, feeling the perfect restrictive weight of the garment settle against my frame. I do not wear the flashy, gaudy jewelry Marcus always preferred. I select a single, understated platinum timepiece, a watch that costs more than his imaginary first-year bonus. I stand before the full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. I think back to the countless mornings I spent in the Buckhead mansion, deliberately dressing myself in baggy clearance rack cardigans. I remember making myself look small, uninteresting, and entirely forgettable so Marcus and his family could comfortably maintain their illusions of superiority. I spent 7 years shrinking my genius to fit inside the tiny, suffocating box of their expectations. I filed their taxes, I managed their boring paperwork, and I let them mock my intelligence while I silently built an empire that could swallow them whole. That woman is completely gone. The person looking back at me in the mirror is the managing director of a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. She is the architect of a hostile takeover that is about to make regional financial history. I walk back to the glass desk and gather the audit reports. I place the damning financial records, the forged vendor invoices, and Marcus's signed liability waivers into a sleek black leather briefcase. Every single document in this case represents a nail in his corporate coffin. He threatened to drag me into court, completely unaware that I am the one who owns the judge, the jury, and the executioner in this scenario. I check the platinum watch on my wrist. It is exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. The senior board members of Apex Vanguard are already gathering in the primary conference room on the top floor of our corporate headquarters. They are reviewing the final operational protocols, waiting for my absolute command. Marcus is likely on his way downtown right now, wearing his best ruined suit, practicing his arrogant victory speech, and preparing to assert his dominance over a company he does not realize is completely hollow. Trent is probably right behind him, sweating through his shirt, desperate to beg the newly minted CEO for legal protection from the federal authorities I unleashed on his fraudulent startup. They are marching directly into the center of the labyrinth, blindly convinced they hold the upper hand. I snap the brass locks of the briefcase shut. The sharp metallic click echoes through the quiet penthouse, signaling the end of the preparation phase. I turn on my heel, my sharp stiletto pumps striking the polished stone floor with lethal intent, and walk toward the private elevator. The trap is fully set, the evidence is secured, and I am entirely ready to step into the boardroom and watch the steel doors lock firmly behind my prey. A smooth, continuous tracking shot perfectly captures Marcus Sterling striding through the immaculate transparent glass corridors of the Apex Vanguard Global Headquarters. The camera follows him from a low, trailing angle, highlighting the sheer, unearned arrogance in his posture. He is wearing a brand new, aggressively tailored navy blue suit, having rushed to a luxury boutique the moment they opened this morning to replace the garments ruined on his front lawn. His chin is tilted upward, his shoulders thrown back, projecting the absolute delusion of a man who believes he has just conquered the corporate world. The morning sun glares intensely through the floor-to-ceiling glass panes of the 50th floor, casting sharp, angular shadows across the imported Italian marble beneath his expensive leather shoes. To Marcus, this towering architecture of glass and steel is his new kingdom. He views the bustling junior analysts and sharp-suited executives parting ways for him, not as busy professionals, but as subjects making way for their newly appointed monarch. He has completely compartmentalized the humiliating eviction from the night before, twisting the narrative in his mind to convince himself that his wife was merely throwing a pathetic domestic tantrum. He firmly believes that once he cements his power in this building today, he will crush her in court and take back everything he thinks he owns. Walking exactly half a step behind him, completely ruining the majestic visual of Marcus's grand entrance, is Trent. The camera shifts its focus slightly to capture the stark, pathetic contrast between the two men. Trent looks like a dead man walking. His usually pristine finance uniform is wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. His hair is unkempt. His face is a sickly pale gray, and his bloodshot eyes are darting frantically around the sleek corporate environment. Trent has spent the entire night hyperventilating, staring at the catastrophic legal notices from the risk management department, realizing his fake startup is a one-way ticket to federal prison. He is clutching his leather briefcase to his chest like a flimsy shield. He has practically attached himself to Marcus's side, viewing the newly minted chief executive officer as his absolute last and only lifeline. Trent is desperately hoping that Marcus can march into this board meeting and throw his corporate weight around to kill the fraud investigation before the authorities freeze his personal bank accounts. Marcus does not even bother to look at his brother-in-law as they approach the massive frosted glass doors of the primary boardroom. He simply waves his hand dismissively, clearly irritated by the unmistakable smell of fear radiating from Trent. "You need to pull yourself together right now," Marcus mutters, his voice dripping with condescending superiority and supreme annoyance. "You are embarrassing me in front of my new staff. I am walking into this room as the chief executive officer of their largest health technology acquisition. I have the entire board of directors eating out of the palm of my hand. I will simply sit down, look their compliance department in the eye, and tell them that your little bookkeeping error was a harmless misunderstanding. I will order them to drop the lawsuit immediately. That is the exact kind of high-level leverage I possess now. Just keep your mouth shut, let the adults do the talking, and try not to sweat on the expensive mahogany furniture." Trent nods frantically, gulping down air, completely blinded by the illusion of Marcus's corporate power. He genuinely believes his arrogant brother-in-law can magically erase a federal wire fraud indictment with a single confident handshake and a charismatic smile. He is ready to drop to his knees and beg the executives for mercy, trusting Marcus to shield him from the devastating consequences of his own criminal actions. The heavy glass doors slide open silently, revealing the absolute apex of corporate power. The main conference room is a terrifying masterpiece of intimidation. A massive oval-shaped table carved from a single flawless piece of dark obsidian dominates the center of the expansive room. The perimeter is lined with a dozen senior executives, forensic auditors, and top-tier legal counsel, all dressed in immaculate dark suits. They are completely silent. Nobody stands to greet the new chief executive officer. Nobody offers a welcoming smile, a warm handshake, or a polite round of applause. The atmosphere in the room is suffocatingly cold, heavy, with an unspoken, lethal anticipation. The executives stare at Marcus and Trent with the flat, unblinking expressions of a firing squad waiting for the final command. At the absolute head of the table sits a towering, high-backed leather executive chair. The chair is turned completely away from the door, facing the panoramic window overlooking the sprawling Atlanta skyline. Marcus adjusts his expensive silk tie one final time, completely misreading the deafening silence as a display of ultimate respect and awe. He steps fully into the room, puffing out his chest, ready to deliver his triumphant inaugural address. He strides toward the head of the table, closely followed by a trembling Trent, completely oblivious to the soft, definitive click of the heavy glass doors sliding shut and electronically locking right behind them. The steel trap has officially closed, and the prey has just walked willingly into the center of the slaughterhouse. The camera of my reality shifts, executing a slow, relentless circular track shot. The lens detaches from any fixed perspective and begins a smooth, continuous orbit around the massive obsidian table, capturing the shifting dynamics of the room in real time. It glides past the cold, unblinking faces of the forensic auditors and senior legal counsel moving steadily toward the head of the table. Marcus stops exactly 3 feet away from the massive leather chair. He clears his throat, a sound that rings hollow in the cavernous, silent room. He straightens his posture, ready to deliver the opening lines of a speech he practiced in the mirror for 2 hours this morning. He opens his mouth to introduce himself to the mysterious chairman of Apex Vanguard, fully prepared to demand leniency for his brother-in-law and assert his dominance over the newly acquired health technology firm. Before a single arrogant syllable can escape his lips, the high-backed leather executive chair slowly begins to rotate. The mechanical swivel is entirely silent, but the psychological impact is deafening. The chair completes its rotation. I am sitting there, framed perfectly against the sprawling backdrop of the Atlanta skyline. I am wearing the midnight black tailored suit, my hands resting lightly on the polished glass surface of the table, my platinum watch catching the morning sunlight. I am not shrinking. I am not accommodating. I am radiating the absolute, terrifying authority of a woman who holds the fate of everyone in this room in the palm of her hand. Marcus physically recoils. He staggers backward as if he has just been struck in the chest by a sledgehammer. The blood completely vanishes from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. His mouth drops open, but his vocal cords are paralyzed. He blinks rapidly, his mind violently rejecting the visual information his eyes are feeding him. He expects to see a billionaire, an aging corporate titan, or a ruthless hedge fund manager. He cannot process the fact that the supreme architect of his entire corporate existence is the woman he left a plate of dry chicken for 48 hours ago. Behind him, Trent's knees physically buckle. He grabs the back of an empty leather chair to keep himself from collapsing to the marble floor. Trent recognizes me instantly, not as the freelance tax prep girl he mocked at Thanksgiving, but as the executioner who just forwarded his entire digital Ponzi scheme to the federal authorities. Naomi Marcus finally chokes out. His voice is a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. It sounds like the final gasp of a dying animal. "What are you doing here? How did you get in this room?" The circular tracking shot glides smoothly past him, capturing the exact moment a thick, heavy bead of cold sweat breaks out on his forehead and begins a slow, agonizing descent down his temple. "Take a seat, Marcus," I command. My voice is not raised. I do not shout. I speak with the quiet, devastating calm of a judge delivering a death sentence. Marcus does not argue. His legs give way, and he drops heavily into the nearest chair, his eyes wide and vacant. Trent slumps into the seat beside him, his chest heaving as he struggles to pull oxygen into his panicked lungs. "You walked into this building today believing you were a king." I continue, holding Marcus's terrified gaze. "You believed your brilliance, your networking, and your tailored suits earned you the title of Chief Executive Officer. You thought the board of directors looked at your mediocre career and saw a visionary leader ready to guide a massive health technology conglomerate into the future." I lean forward slightly, resting my forearms on the obsidian table. The camera continues its slow orbit, capturing the row of elite executives sitting perfectly still, waiting for my absolute command. Let me introduce you to Reality Marcus. I am the founder, the primary shareholder, and the sole managing director of Apex Vanguard. Every single person sitting at this table works directly for me. I own the building you are sitting in. I own the holding company that evicted you from my house last night. And most importantly, for your immediate future, my firm recently executed a hostile takeover of the company you currently claim to run. Marcus shakes his head violently, a gesture of pure infantile denial. "No," he stammers, gripping the edges of the table. "No, that is impossible. You are an accountant. You work from the guest bedroom. My mother said you were having a breakdown." "Your mother is a deeply delusional woman who is currently watching her country club status burn to ash," I reply coldly. "But let us focus on your delusions because they are about to carry a much steeper price tag." I reach into my black leather briefcase and extract a thick, legally binding document stamped with a red seal. I slide it smoothly across the polished obsidian surface. It comes to a stop directly in front of Marcus. He stares at it as if it were a live explosive. "Do you recognize this document, Marcus?" I ask. "It is your employment contract. The one you signed so eagerly 2 days ago. The one you celebrated by humiliating me in front of our entire family." He stares at the signature on the final page. It is his own handwriting, bold and arrogant. "You did not read the fine print, did you?" I say, my voice slicing through the silent room like a razor blade. "You were too intoxicated by the title. You were too busy picking out corner offices and planning your victory dinner to hire a competent corporate attorney to review the liability clauses. If you had read it, you would have realized that you were not being promoted to lead a successful company. You were being positioned as a human shield." The tracking shot moves behind me, showing my silhouette, commanding the room, looking down at the two broken men. "The health technology firm you just took over is a toxic wasteland," I explain with clinical precision. "The previous executive board engaged in massive systemic embezzlement. They falsified tax returns, defrauded federal health programs, and racked up millions in toxic debt before fleeing the company. Apex Vanguard bought the decaying shell of that corporation for pennies on the dollar to liquidate its remaining patents. But we needed a scapegoat. We needed a legally liable officer to take the fall for the historical financial crimes before we dismantled the assets." I watch the exact moment the realization strikes him. His eyes widen to an impossible degree. His mouth opens in a silent scream of absolute terror. We needed an arrogant, narcissistic fool who loved the sound of his own name so much he would sign away his legal immunity without a second thought. I continue delivering the final crushing blow. "By signing that specific contract, Marcus, you retroactively assumed full unlimited personal liability for every single financial discrepancy, unpaid debt, and act of corporate fraud committed by that company over the last 5 years. You are not a CEO. You are a designated fall guy." "But I did not do it!" Marcus gasps, his voice cracking into a sob. "I did not steal that money. You cannot do this to me. You signed the papers taking responsibility for it." The lead legal counsel for Apex Vanguard states, flatly from across the table, speaking for the first time, "The contract is ironclad, Mr. Sterling. You have indemnified the previous board and assumed all corporate debts personally." I turn my gaze to Trent. The camera tracks smoothly to frame his pathetic, trembling form. He is shaking so violently, his chair is rattling against the floor. "And you, Trent?" I say, my tone shifting to pure disgust. "You thought you could walk in here and use Marcus's imaginary power to stop a federal investigation into your fake startup. You thought the man sitting next to you could save you from the wire fraud charges I personally filed with the SEC this morning." Trent lets out a ragged, choking sound, burying his face in his hands. "Marcus cannot save you, Trent," I state with absolute finality. "Marcus cannot even save himself. The federal authorities are not just coming for your fake user logs today. They are also coming for the millions of dollars missing from Marcus's new company." The slow, circular track shot completes its rotation, returning to a tight, perfectly framed shot of my face. The absolute destruction of the two men who spent years treating me like garbage is completely finalized. I have not just ruined their careers. I have legally bound them to the consequences of their own staggering, unforgivable arrogance. The boardroom remains deathly silent save for the pathetic, ragged breathing of the two men realizing their lives are officially over. I reach into my black leather briefcase one final time. My movements are deliberate, unhurried, and perfectly calibrated to inflict maximum psychological tension. I pull out 2 thick stacks of heavily redacted, officially stamped financial audits. I lift them high enough for both men to see the federal seals printed on the cover pages, then I slam them down onto the center of the obsidian table. The explosive smack of the heavy paper hitting the glass reverberates through the silent boardroom like a gunshot. Marcus flinches violently, pressing his back into his chair, as if the documents themselves are radioactive. Trent practically shrinks into himself, his eyes darting wildly toward the locked glass doors, as the reality of his situation begins to suffocate him. "Trent!" I say, not even bothering to look at his sweating, panicked face as I flip open the first file. The federal authorities received your unredacted pitch deck, your fabricated server logs, and the routing numbers for your Delaware shell companies exactly 2 hours ago. My compliance director just received confirmation from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They have officially frozen your personal bank accounts, your commercial credit lines, and the joint accounts you hold with my sister Chloe. You have absolutely zero access to capital. I highly recommend you spend the next few minutes deciding which public defender you want to represent you. The federal agents are currently waiting in the lobby of your rented Midtown office space to escort you out in handcuffs. Trent lets out a guttural, hyperventilating sob. He literally slides off his expensive leather chair, collapsing onto the marble floor. He curls into a pathetic, trembling ball as his entire false reality disintegrates around him. He does not scream or beg. He simply weeps, paralyzed by the crushing, inescapable weight of his impending federal prison sentence. His arrogant finance bro persona has been completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I turn my absolute, unforgiving focus back to Marcus. His eyes are wide, glassy, and completely hollow. He is a man who has just watched his own executioner sharpen the blade. As the primary shareholder and managing director of Apex Vanguard, I am exercising my executive authority to terminate your employment effective immediately. I state my voice stripped of all human emotion and projecting pure corporate lethality. You are officially stripped of your Chief Executive Officer title. Your corporate access is permanently revoked. Your company vehicle, your executive expense accounts, and your comprehensive health benefits are canceled as of this exact second. Furthermore, because you were terminated under gross negligence and severe corporate liability, your severance package and your stock options are completely voided. You are walking out of this building with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back and the multi-million-dollar corporate debt you voluntarily signed for. The reality of his absolute inescapable ruin finally crashes through Marcus's thick skull. The arrogant, posturing man who mocked me in his driveway just 48 hours ago completely vanishes. The man who texted me threats about bringing me to court is dead. He scrambles out of his chair and physically drops to his knees on the cold marble floor. He reaches his shaking hands out toward the edge of the obsidian table, his face contorted in an ugly, desperate grimace. Tears stream down his cheeks, ruining his carefully curated image. The senior executives lining the boardroom walls stare down at him with expressions of profound, icy disgust. "Naomi, please!" Marcus begs, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Please, you cannot do this to me. We are married. We spent 7 years together. I love you. I was just stressed. My mother was putting pressure on me. I can change. I will do whatever you want. Just tear up that contract. Please, Naomi, I am begging you. Do not let me go to prison. Do not take everything away from me. I will sign whatever you want. I will give you whatever you ask for. Just please let me go." I do not feel an ounce of pity. I do not feel a single flicker of hesitation. The man crawling on the floor in front of me is the same man who stood in my kitchen and told me I was not sophisticated enough to eat dinner with his colleagues. He is the same man who let his mother insult my working-class background and let his brother-in-law mock my intelligence. He only claims to love me now because I am holding a financial gun to his head. If a cinematic camera were capturing this definitive moment, it would aggressively drop to the floor. The visual perspective would switch to a severe, extreme, low-angle shot, pointing directly upward at me. This specific camera angle would magnify my physical presence, transforming me from a seated executive into a towering, invincible monolith of absolute power. The lens would capture me slowly, deliberately standing up from the high-backed leather chair. My midnight black tailored suit cuts a sharp, imposing silhouette against the bright Atlanta skyline, blazing through the window behind me. Looking down from this majestic, terrifying height, Marcus appears smaller than an insect. I look down at my soon-to-be ex-husband groveling at my feet. I let a slow, freezing smile touch the corners of my mouth. I lean slightly over the edge of the glass table, making sure my voice is the absolute last thing he hears before the security team drags him away. You should really hurry home, Marcus. I say, my voice dripping with pure, concentrated venom. You forgot to finish the leftovers in the fridge. I do not wait for his response. I do not listen to his frantic, hysterical screaming as the boardroom security guards step forward to physically haul him and Trent out of the room. I simply turn my back on the wreckage of the Sterling family, pick up my black leather briefcase, and walk toward the private executive exit. My sharp stiletto pumps click a triumphant, undeniable rhythm against the marble floor, echoing the sound of my absolute victory. The heavy glass doors of the Apex Vanguard building slid shut behind me, completely sealing off the toxic chapter of my life. Time did not just move forward. It accelerated violently, dragging the Sterling family through the exact consequences they had so desperately earned. If a camera were to capture the sheer magnificent speed of their absolute destruction, it would execute a series of slow fluid cross dissolves, melting one scene of devastation seamlessly into the next. The first cross dissolve fades from the gleaming Atlanta skyline into the dimly lit, suffocatingly cramped back room of a high-end luxury consignment shop in Buckhead. Vivian Sterling is standing at a scuffed folding table. The haughty, untouchable matriarch who once paraded around the Piedmont Country Club in custom emerald silk is completely unrecognizable. She is wearing dark sunglasses indoors, her posture hunched, her hands trembling violently as she pushes a massive pile of authentic Hermes Birkin bags and vintage Chanel jackets toward an utterly unimpressed appraiser. She is arguing over pennies, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. She needs every single dollar she can squeeze from her superficial armor just to afford the retaining fees for the ruthless criminal defense attorneys attempting to keep Marcus out of federal prison. The camera slowly pushes in on her face as the appraiser hands her a check for a mere fraction of what the items are worth. The elite society women who used to hang on her every word now cross the street when they see her approaching. Vivian has become the ultimate cautionary tale of Atlanta high society, completely stripped of her wealth, her pride, and her false dignity. The scene slowly dissolves the harsh fluorescent lights of the consignment shop, bleeding into the sterile, unforgiving glare of a federal courthouse holding cell. Trent is sitting on a steel bench wearing a bright orange, remarkably unflattering jumpsuit. The loud, arrogant finance bro who once mocked my intelligence is completely gone. His face is gaunt, his eyes hollow and terrified. He is staring blankly at the cold concrete floor, fully comprehending that his visionary artificial intelligence algorithm just bought him a guaranteed 5 to 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. The camera smoothly pulls back and dissolves right through the steel bars of the cell, transitioning into a cramped, aggressively mediocre apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. Chloe is sitting at a cheap plastic dining table, violently signing her name at the bottom of a massive stack of divorce papers. She is wearing sweatpants, her expensive blonde highlights growing out into dark, unkempt roots. She thought she was marrying into generational wealth, but her opportunistic greed bound her to a convicted felon with entirely frozen assets. Chloe is completely isolated. When she tries to show her face at the local coffee shops, the wealthy women she used to desperately emulate physically turn their backs to her, whispering harsh, condemning judgments, just loud enough for her to hear. She traded her own sister for a seat at a table that ultimately served her nothing but absolute ruin. Another slow cross dissolve washes over the screen, melting Chloe's pathetic reality into a dark, suffocating, and incredibly depressing motel room. The walls are stained, the carpet is peeling, and the only source of light is the harsh blue glow of a cheap television screen. Marcus is sitting on the edge of a sagging mattress. The golden child of the Sterling family. The man who believed he was destined to rule the corporate world is completely broken. He is wearing a faded, wrinkled t-shirt, staring blankly at a terrifying mountain of legal summons and aggressive collection notices piled high on a flimsy bedside table. Because he arrogantly signed that employment contract without reading the fine print, Marcus is now personally liable for millions of dollars in corporate debt and staggering federal fines. Every single bank in the country has blacklisted him. Every prestigious firm in the city has entirely deleted his resume. He has absolutely no assets, no elite connections, and no powerful family safety net to catch his fall. He picks up his cracked smartphone, the very same device he used to send me empty threats just weeks ago. His thumb hovers over the screen, scrolling through financial news articles, highlighting the explosive continued success of Apex Vanguard. The camera settles into a tight, agonizing close-up of Marcus's face. The sheer crushing weight of his monumental failure finally breaks him. He drops the phone onto the cheap mattress and buries his face in his hands, completely consumed by the devastating reality that he willingly threw away a diamond to protect a pile of dirt. The bitter echo of Marcus's pathetic laughter fades completely into the background, instantly replaced by the soft rustling of leaves and the fresh, vibrant energy of a brilliant spring morning. The setting changes entirely. I am no longer standing in a cold, sterile glass boardroom or suffocating inside a luxury town car. I am standing right in the center of the historic campus of Spelman College in Atlanta. It is the legendary proving ground for generations of brilliant, resilient Black women. The morning sunlight pours down like liquid gold across the immaculate green lawns, catching the red brick of the classic architecture and filtering through the branches of the ancient oak trees. This is exactly where I used to belong. This is the place that originally taught me to hold my head high and claim my space long before I ever allowed myself to get trapped in the toxic, suffocating cage of the Sterling family for 7 years. I walk slowly down the stone pathway. The heavy fabric of my bespoke black suit shifts with every deliberate, grounded step I take. All around me, young Black female students are rushing to their classes holding heavy textbooks against their chests. Their laughter rings out through the crisp morning air, and their eyes are absolutely shining with hope and raw ambition. Looking at them is like looking at a mirror reflecting my past. I see the woman I was 10 years ago, a fiercely ambitious girl who just did not quite have the capital or the power to protect herself yet. But today, I am walking back onto this campus occupying an entirely different universe of authority. I come to a stop in front of a massive polished wooden table that has been formally set up right in the middle of the main quad. Resting on top of the table is the official founding agreement for the Hayes Vanguard Scholarship Fund. It is a $50 million venture capital initiative sponsored and fully funded by my company, Apex Vanguard. The core mission of this fund is not just to hand out basic financial aid. The goal is to provide aggressive seed capital, elite legal counsel, and an impenetrable corporate launchpad for young Black women who want to build their own empires in the technology and finance sectors. I am making absolutely certain that no woman graduating from this institution will ever feel forced to endure systemic disrespect or shrink her genius just to soothe the fragile, pathetic ego of any man. I pick up my heavy brass fountain pen. The camera begins a smooth, highly focused movement, pushing in for an extreme close-up of my hand. The lens captures the exact moment I press the nib to the crisp white paper and sign my name with aggressive, undeniable force. Naomi Hayes. The toxic surname of Sterling has been completely and permanently eradicated from my existence. It leaves absolutely no trace behind. Signing this document is not just a generous charitable donation. It is a lethal, definitive declaration of my financial independence, my absolute autonomy, and the undeniable power of a self-made woman. The college president and the surrounding board of directors erupt into genuine thunderous applause. Their eyes are sparkling with profound admiration and pride. I look down at my signature and smile. It is the most serene, perfectly unburdened smile I have felt on my face in a decade. After shaking hands with the administration, I step forward, physically separating myself from the crowd. I stand directly in front of the camera lens. The brilliant, blinding sunlight from the morning sky shines directly behind me, creating a massive, radiant halo that envelops my entire silhouette. I look straight into the dead center of the lens. My dark eyes are deep, completely unwavering, and burning with a cold, terrifying clarity. They looked at my simple clothes, I say, my voice projecting smooth, undeniable power. They looked at my silent endurance and my quiet demeanor, and they smugly declared that I was a failure. They called me a leftover wife with absolutely no future. Marcus, Vivian, Trent, and Chloe genuinely believed that this world was run by their flashy designer suits and their pathetic, glamorous lies. They thought I was just collateral damage, someone who should be endlessly grateful just to be granted a folding chair at the very edge of their elite table. But they did not know that I was the one standing in the shadows the entire time. They did not know I was the one silently controlling the cash flow, manipulating their destiny, and holding the master key to that entire table. While they were busy celebrating a completely delusional victory, I was busy nailing the coffin shut on their entire empire. As soon as the final word leaves my lips, the camera begins to execute a flawlessly smooth, incredibly slow pullback. The lens moves backward, steadily retreating and widening the frame. The visual space around me expands dramatically, capturing the breathtaking sun-drenched quad, the historic brick buildings, and the vibrant, lush green lawns of Spelman College. I'm standing dead center in the frame, physically small, against the massive architecture, but radiating an incredibly majestic, undeniable power. I am standing completely alone, but I have never been more free. I merge perfectly into the brilliant, blinding light of my new life. The golden sunlight flares up slowly, washing out the screen in pure, absolute brightness, until the frame finally cuts to black.